During a cruise, the family gets caught in a storm and discovers the ocean has turned into desert. Oceanographer Tom from the University of Miami, his wife Julia, and their children Cassie and Ben set off on a cruise through the Caribbean Sea off the coast of Puerto Rico. Tom and Ben fish carelessly, Cassie listens to music, and Julia decides to take a swim. Meanwhile, something strange is happening deep beneath the sea. Julia drifts away from the yacht, enjoying the sun and the sea, when suddenly she shudders and looks around in fear. After reassuring herself that there's nothing nearby, she tries to relax again, but something continues to unsettle her. Julia decides to head back to the yacht, but suddenly a mysterious force starts pulling her down into the depths. At the same time, all the equipment on the ship begins malfunctioning. She calls out for help, but her family is too distracted to hear her. Finally, Tom notices the strange noise and sees his wife sinking. He rushes to the wheel, steers the yacht towards Julia, and jumps into the water. Together with the children, they pull her aboard. Shaken, Julia tries to regain her composure and tells her family that she was caught in a current and felt she was about to drown. Tom reminds his wife and children to always let him know when they go swimming and never stray too far from the yacht. Once calmed down, the family continues to enjoy their vacation. In the evening, they gather at the table to celebrate Ben's 13th birthday. The boy blows out the candles on his cake and receives gifts: a laptop from his parents and a rubber monster mask from his sister. Julia also hands him a small box with a bracelet that brings good luck and wards off evil spirits, and the happy family takes a cute group photo. Then, Cassie's boyfriend, Adam, calls her via video chat. He asks how their cruise is going, and Cassie shares that her mom nearly drowned, but otherwise, nothing exciting happened. Adam and Cassie admit that they miss each other a lot and plan their next meeting. Suddenly, a violent storm starts brewing behind Adam. Cassie is worried about Adam, but he reassures her that he's fine. However, a few seconds later, the connection cuts off. Anxious, Cassie tells her parents about the storm, and just then, Ben feels strange jolts. The family rushes to the deck and sees several whales surrounding the yacht. Tom explains that whales follow magnetic fields and can be thrown off course by a storm, heading toward land without realizing it. But the whales begin rocking the yacht, threatening to overturn it. Tom decides to dive into the water to check the propellers, but quickly returns to the boat with a wound on his shoulder. While Julia stitches him up, Tom tells her that underwater, he felt something behind him. He spun around and cut himself on the propeller blade, but he never figured out what creature scared him. Tom also mentions that the yacht's hull is bent, and one of the propellers is broken. They can't make it back to shore on their own, and due to communication problems, calling for help isn't easy. Cassie runs around the deck, trying to catch a signal, while Julia attempts to send a distress signal via radio but only hears fragments of foreign speech. Panicked, Tom announces that they have enough food and water for just 4 days but notes that they are on a shipping lane, so someone will surely find them within that time. Suddenly, new, mysterious sounds are heard outside. The family rushes back to the deck and watches in horror as unidentified, fiery objects resembling meteorites fall from the sky into the water. Each falling object gets closer to the yacht, and Tom tries to start the engine of the malfunctioning ship. Fortunately, he manages to move the yacht a few meters before the engine completely breaks down. In the next moment, a glowing object crashes down right next to the yacht. Tom discovers that these aren't meteorites, they're artificial satellites. Meanwhile, the wind intensifies. The family quickly retreats inside the yacht and shuts all the windows. The gusts and waves rock the vessel, turning everything upside down. Ben loses his balance and falls, injuring his shoulder, while Tom hands out life jackets to the family, just in case the yacht capsizes. Suddenly, a deafening clang fills the air, causing nausea and ruptured blood vessels for the whole family. Overcoming the pain, Tom reaches the window and fires a distress flare, but no one notices it. The next morning, Tom, Julia, and the kids regain their senses after the wild night and survey the partially destroyed yacht. They then go out on deck and are stunned to discover that all the water has disappeared. The sea has turned into an endless desert, and the yacht miraculously remains perched on a rocky outcrop. Cassie once again unsuccessfully tries to catch a signal, but Tom is sure there must be other survivors nearby, and they need to find them. Tom then pulls out a compass and, with even more confusion, notices that the Earth's poles have shifted. The north is now south, and the south is now north. Julia refuses to believe this, but Tom explains that such an event happened 700,000 years ago. Now, the sea has retreated to where land once was, and most likely, the majority of humanity has perished. Cassie refuses to accept that Adam is gone and, tearfully, runs to the cabin. Julia tries to console her, saying that perhaps things aren't as bad as they think, but Cassie brushes her off and continues mourning Adam. Looking at his photo, Julia starts gathering scattered supplies, while Tom tries to fix the radio. Meanwhile, Ben comes up with a creative idea. He collects several balloons from his birthday and releases them into the air, keeping them tethered with a long string. He hopes that this way, other survivors will be able to find them. Soon, Tom manages to fix the radio and contacts another survivor, a captain named Now. now confirms Tom's suspicion about the magnetic field inversion and shares that he had just descended to the ocean floor in a scientific submersible. Now also claims that, based on seismic activity, the inversion may happen again within a week. Since the water will return, they need to find the highest point to survive. Julia and Tom decide to go in search of the safest place as soon as possible and ask the kids to gather the most essential things. When Cassie and Ben leave, Tom asks now if he can take them on board. Now reveals that his submersible can only hold 3 people. Tom and Julia then ask if he can at least take their children, but suddenly now stops responding. The parents are concerned that their request may have scared now, but soon he reconnects and provides his location's coordinates. Tom quickly plots the route on the map and realizes the journey will take them 2 or 3 days. After wrapping up the conversation with Now, Tom suggests to his wife that they get a good night's sleep and set off early in the morning to reach their destination before the water returns. Julia is anxious about their family's fate, but Tom reassures her, confident that they'll manage. The next morning, the whole family prepares for the journey. While Julia and Cassie organize the supplies, Tom steps off the yacht and spots a stranger with a dog in the distance. The suspicious man, armed with a harpoon, approaches them. Tom grabs a water flask and moves toward him. He greets the man, expressing relief at seeing another person, and, noticing the man's limp, offers his wife's help. Tom hands over the flask, and as the stranger drinks greedily, Julia steps out to introduce herself. But suddenly, the stranger lunges at Tom. Julia runs to her husband, pleading with the stranger to stop, but he grabs the harpoon and drives it into Tom's stomach, then his neck. Having killed Tom, the man turns toward Julia. Terrified, she runs for the yacht, but he throws the harpoon, striking her in the shoulder. Meanwhile, the children remain unaware of what's happening outside, absorbed in their own activities. Luckily, Julia manages to reach the yacht, and Cassie and Ben arrive just in time to help. After locking all the windows and doors, Julia hides the children in a compartment under the couch and gives Cassie a loaded flare gun for self-defense. She then grabs a knife and runs to the bathroom, quickly sealing her shoulder wound before preparing to face the intruder. Meanwhile, the stranger climbs aboard the yacht, breaks down the door, and enters the cabin. He immediately spots an open can of food on the table and attacks it, before carefully searching the yacht. Soon, he reaches the bathroom, but Julia is already gone. She quietly slips out through a hole in the wall and hides outside. Not noticing her, the man returns to the cabin. Terrified, Julia considers making her way around the yacht, but suddenly the bandit's dog appears in front of her, barking loudly. Julia tries to push it away with a knife, but the dog lunges at her arm, leaving her no choice but to stab it to defend herself. The man hears the dog whimper, distracted for a moment, and Julia takes the opportunity to sneak back onto the yacht and slip inside through another hole. However, just a few minutes later, the enraged man returns, violently attacking the helpless woman. She struggles to defend herself, even reaching for the fallen knife, but he steps on her hand, forcing her to release it. As he continues to beat her, he throws her onto the couch and begins to strangle her. The children, hiding inside the nearby couch, watch in horror. Finally, Cassie gathers the courage to open the compartment and fire the flare gun at the crazed stranger. The explosion from the flare sets the yacht on fire. Julia grabs the prepared bags, and she and the children make their way outside. Ben immediately runs to his father's body, tearfully begging him to wake up. Julia and Cassie join him, and they say their final goodbyes to Tom. But suddenly, Julia notices with horror that the bandit has somehow escaped the burning yacht alive. Struggling, she pulls Ben away from his father's body, and they all run into the rocky desert. After a while, the family decides to rest in a canyon. Cassie offers Ben some water, but the boy is too devastated by the loss to respond. Cassie then suggests that the bandit is probably drawn to the hot air balloons Ben had tied to a rock. Her words wound Ben even more, but Julia quickly reassures her son, telling him he is not to blame. Soon, the family continues their journey, while the insane stranger trails behind them. Along the way, Ben discovers the carcass of a hammerhead shark and inspects it with curiosity, but then Julia notices that the bandit is still following them. The family runs again, having to descend a slope and navigate through barrels of toxic waste and piles of garbage. But finally, they manage to lose the crazed bandit. Soon, Julia realizes that Ben is severely dehydrated and hands him the flask, only to find, to her dismay, that it's almost empty. Ben drinks the last few drops, and Cassie admits she accidentally didn't close the cap tightly. Julia, frantic, scolds her daughter, knowing they can't survive without water. However, Cassie calmly states that they have no chance anyway. The family continues their trek across the endless desert, and by evening, they come across a crashed airplane. They make their way inside the wreckage and decide to stay there for the night. While sorting through the belongings, Julia finds their last family photograph, taken during Ben's birthday celebration. A stunned Cassie asks her mother to tell the story of how she met her father. Julia recalls how, at 22, she was an intern at a clinic in Nice when a German man was brought in after a failed dive. At the time, Tom was writing his dissertation on coral extinction and conducting research. But when he was brought up, there had been decompression issues. After recovering from the accident, he immediately started courting Julia. 6 months later, after defending his dissertation, he got a job in Miami and invited her to come with him. That night, Cassie wakes to a strange noise. She quietly sneaks outside to investigate and then decides to relieve herself. Suddenly, the bandit sneaks up behind her, but just as he's about to attack, Julia leaps at him. The next morning, Julia and the kids prepare to continue their journey. However, after stepping off the plane, they discover that the body of the bandit has been horribly mangled, and it's clear that this was no human doing. Cassie is terrified by the thought that there might be something even more dangerous than this psychopath lurking in the desert, but Julia urges her not to dwell on it and to keep moving toward their goal. Later, as the day wears on, Julia checks the map, while a parched Ben rushes to the filthy salty water and greedily drinks from it, until his mother and sister pull him away. Soon, Ben's condition worsens. As evening approaches, the family stumbles upon a scattering of seats. Julia and Cassie manage to build a shelter from them, where they stay the night with Ben. This time, a strange noise wakes Julia. She steps outside and notices that unknown creatures are approaching their shelter. She rushes back to the others, calling for the kids, and they all flee from the new danger. After a while, they spot an overturned ship in the distance, with scattered containers nearby and 3 people standing beside them. Julia begs them for help, but when they see the massive crabs, they ignore her pleas and hide in one of the containers. Julia and the kids climb onto the roof of the container, but one of the crabs still manages to snag Julia's leg, leaving a serious wound. Meanwhile, the crabs begin to crawl inside the container through a gap. Although the 3 of them try to fight off the terrifying creatures, the monsters still manage to devour them. Once safe on the roof, Julia ties a scarf around her injured leg but soon loses consciousness. She wakes up in the morning to find that the kids are nowhere to be seen. Panicked, Julia rushes down to the ground and calls out for Cassie and Ben. Thankfully, they're safe. They come out to their mother and explain that they tried to find help but were unsuccessful. However, in the containers where the crabs had already left, they find weapons and valuable water supplies. Julia also notices a radio and immediately contacts Now. It turns out that he, too, has been badly injured by the crabs and is barely hanging on. Now explains that these creatures have risen from the depths, and since their usual food source is gone, they're forced to adapt and hunt. Julia tells Now that it's just the 3 of them now and again pleads with him to save her children. Now warns her that according to his equipment, the water will return sooner than expected. Julia and the kids need to hurry, as time is running out. Panicking, Julia admits they've lost their way and don't know where to go. Now launches a signal flare, and the family immediately heads in the right direction. Soon, they spot a yellow submersible in the distance, but they realize that getting to it will be difficult because of the desert's treacherous terrain. Still, the family presses on. They navigate through a dangerous canyon as the ground begins to shake, signaling the return of the water. Rocks start to fall in the canyon, and one of them separates Julia from the kids. She urges them to go on without her and promises to catch up. Cassie screams that she won't leave her, but Julia insists that she save Ben. The stunned children run ahead, and Julia sees thousands of enormous crabs emerging from cracks in the rocks. She fights back against the deepwater monsters, but they keep coming. Meanwhile, Cassie and Ben make it to the submersible and find that Now's injuries are fatal. Realizing he won't survive, Now urges them to get into the submarine as quickly as possible. Cassie realizes there will now be enough space for the entire family in the submarine and decides to return for her mother. Ben gives her a lucky bracelet to wear. Fortunately, Cassie arrives just in time to help Julia out of the canyon unharmed. Mother and daughter rush toward the submersible, with thousands of crabs chasing them. In the final moments, they climb onto the roof, where Ben is already waiting, and try to fend off the creatures. However, the crabs surround the submarine and drag the weakened Now away. Realizing that fighting the monsters is pointless, the family jumps into the submersible and closes the hatch. At that moment, they see a massive wave approaching them. Julia and the kids strap in, hoping for the best. The water lifts the submersible, carrying it on the waves. As this happens, memories of their terrifying journey flash before Julia's eyes, and soon, the entire family loses consciousness. After some time, they regain consciousness and find that the vessel has washed up on shore. Julia opens the hatch, and with the kids, she climbs out. They are greeted with a chilling view of a city destroyed by the water, but despite everything, they are just relieved to have survived. Do you think climate change will cause natural disasters like this in the near future, or is it still too early for humanity to be concerned? Share your thoughts in the comments down below, give us a thumbs up, and make sure to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.